Zip tie was already cutting into her wrist before anyone in that lobby thought to say a word. That's where this story begins. Not with the headlines that came later, not with the press conference or the disciplinary board or the quiet resignation that nobody officially called a firing. It begins in the marble-floored lobby of the Harrington Grand Hotel on a Thursday evening in October, when a security supervisor named Joel Fitch decided that a woman standing near the elevator bank looked like she didn't belong there. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a great many things that night. Her name was Colette Warren, 61 years old. She had a posture that came not from vanity but from decades of standing in rooms where people expected her to be smaller than she was, and she had long since stopped accommodating them. She wore a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, low heels she'd owned for 11 years, no jewelry except a thin gold band on her right hand, her mother's, sized down twice to fit her finger. She was not dressed for a gala. She was dressed the way she always dressed when she wasn't at work, quietly, deliberately, like a woman who had nothing to prove to anyone in that building. She was there to meet her son-in-law, who was picking her up on his way to dinner. He had texted her 40 minutes ago, running behind. "Wait in the lobby. I'll come to you." She had texted back, "Fine." She found a chair near the elevator bank, a low upholstered thing that faced the front entrance, and she sat down and crossed her ankles and watched the revolving door. That was all. That was the entirety of what she did. Joel Fitch noticed her 11 minutes later. He was the kind of man who had worn a uniform of some kind since he was 19 years old, moving from the Army Reserves to local police to private security the way a stone rolls downhill, not with intention, but with momentum. He was 43, broad across the shoulders, with the specific confidence of someone who had spent 2 decades being obeyed in small rooms. He did not like things that felt out of place, and Colette Warren, sitting alone in the lobby of a hotel she hadn't checked into, not looking at her phone, not ordering a drink from the bar cart near the lounge, just sitting. That felt, to Joel Fitch, like something that needed explaining. He approached from her left. "Ma'am." He stopped about 4 feet away, hands clasped in front of him. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Colette looked at him. She took in the uniform, the radio on his hip, the lanyard with the Harrington Grand logo. She said, "Waiting for someone." "Uh-huh." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're not agreeing with you. "Waiting for a guest?" "Waiting for my son-in-law." "And your son-in-law is?" "Running late." She looked back toward the entrance. Fitch shifted his weight. "I'm going to need you to show me some ID, ma'am." Now she looked at him again. "No," she said, simply, without heat. "Excuse me. I'm sitting in a hotel lobby. I'm not required to show you identification." He took a step closer. "We've had some issues with loitering in this space." "I'm not loitering. I'm waiting." She held his gaze. "There's a difference." The thing about Colette Warren was that she did not raise her voice. She had learned early, very early, in a way that people who grow up in certain rooms understand without being taught, that raising your voice gives other people permission to dismiss you. She had spent 40 years speaking at exactly the same volume in every room she entered, whether it was a church basement in Atlanta or a Senate subcommittee hearing in Washington, D.C. The consistency of it was, to some people, more unnerving than shouting would have been. It unnerved Joel Fitch. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to produce identification, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." "Then you'll have to ask me to leave," she said. "I'm not leaving." He called for backup, which, in this context, meant he radioed his colleague, a younger man named Dennis Straw, who appeared from somewhere near the conference room corridor, looking slightly damp, like he'd just come from somewhere he shouldn't have been. Dennis Straw was 26. Newer to the job, and had the expression of a man who understood, somewhere in the back of his mind, that something was going wrong, but couldn't identify exactly what. "This woman is refusing to comply," Fitch said. Dennis looked at Colette. Colette looked at Dennis. "Ma'am," Dennis started. "Young man," she said, not unkindly, "I'm sitting in a chair. I've done nothing wrong. Whatever your supervisor has told you, I would encourage you to look at this situation carefully before you make a decision you cannot undo." Dennis Straw looked at the chair. He looked at Colette. He looked at Fitch. Fitch made the decision for both of them. "I'm detaining you for questioning regarding suspicious activity on these premises." He reached for the zip ties on his belt. Because the Harrington Grand security team did not carry handcuffs, they carried zip ties, a detail that will matter in about 4 minutes. "Stand up, please. Stand up, please." The lobby was not empty. There were perhaps 20 people visible. A couple near the front desk, 2 men in suits waiting for their car, a woman with a rolling suitcase talking on her phone, 3 hotel staff behind the desk, a young woman with a laptop at the bar, an older man reading a newspaper by the window. Not one of them moved. Colette Warren stood. She stood the way she always stood, straight, unhurried, like she was moving on her own timeline and not his. She held out her wrists. "You're making a mistake," she said. "That's for management to decide," Fitch said, pulling the zip tie tight. "And here is the moment you have to sit with. If you want to understand what this story is really about, the sound of that plastic clicking into place, and the silence of 20 people who heard it and turned back to whatever they were doing. That silence. That is the thing Colette Warren would talk about later, in interviews, in the testimony she gave, in the quiet conversations with her daughter at the kitchen table. Not what Fitch did. Not the humiliation of being walked across a marble lobby in a charcoal blazer with her wrists bound. What she remembered was the sound of 20 people deciding it wasn't their problem. Dennis Straw walked slightly behind her, to her left. She could feel him not looking at her. They took her to a small room behind the main reception area that the hotel used for lost and found and staff breaks. There was a folding table, 2 chairs, a coffee maker that smelled burnt. Fitch sat across from her. Dennis stood near the door. "Name," Fitch said. "Colette Warren." "Address." She gave it. "What's your son-in-law's name?" "Marcus Delray." She paused. "He's a physician. He's coming from St. Catherine's Hospital." Fitch wrote this down. "And you say he's a guest here?" "I said he was picking me up. I don't believe he's a guest." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you going to contact him?" "We'll verify your story." "It's not a story. It's what happened." Fitch clicked his pen. "You were observed loitering in the lobby for." "I was sitting in a chair for 11 minutes. I watched you watch me for most of it." She looked at him directly. "I know what this is." He didn't answer that. She didn't expect him to. There was a knock at the door. Dennis opened it and spoke quietly to someone. Then he looked back at Fitch with an expression that was not quite panic, but was adjacent to it. "Joel," he said. "What?" "There's someone here." The someone was a man named Winston Delray, Marcus's father, 67 years old, silver-haired, in a dark navy suit that had not come off a rack anywhere in this hotel's zip code. He was standing in the hallway with his arms folded, and an expression on his face that was not anger. It was something quieter and more durable than anger. It was the expression of a man who had spent his career in rooms where important decisions were made and had learned exactly which tone of voice to use in each of them. "I'm looking," Winston Delray said, "for my daughter-in-law." Fitch appeared in the doorway. "Sir, this is a restricted—" "I know what this is." Winston's voice was even. "I've been standing in that lobby for 4 minutes, long enough to speak with 3 members of your hotel staff, one of whom is currently on the phone with your general manager, and long enough to review the footage from the 2 cameras facing the elevator bank." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, which he held between 2 fingers at Fitch's eye level without extending it. "My name is Winston Delray. I am the Deputy Director of Operations for the Federal Office of Civil Rights Enforcement. Would you like to tell me, in your own words, on what basis you detained this woman?" The room went very still. Dennis Straw made a sound. It was not a word. Fitch looked at the card. He looked at Colette, visible through the doorway in her folding chair, with her wrists still bound. He looked at Dennis, who was absolutely no help. He looked back at Winston Delray. "She was—" he started. "Don't," Winston said. "Not loudly, just clearly. Think very carefully about the next sentence you speak in this hallway." Fitch closed his mouth. Winston stepped past him into the room. He looked at the zip tie on Colette's wrists. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, because men like Winston Delray are not often surprised by the shape that injustice takes. But something. He bent down and, because no one had thought to bring scissors, he worked the latch mechanism of the zip tie until it released. Colette rubbed her wrists. She looked up at him. "Marcus is parking the car," Winston said. "Of course he is," she said. There was something in that exchange, those 8 words between them, that carried the weight of a longer conversation. The kind of conversation Black Americans have with each other in shorthand, because there isn't always time for the full version, and sometimes the full version hurts too much to say out loud in front of people who don't already understand. The hotel's general manager arrived 3 minutes later. Her name was Priya Anand, and she came in moving fast, with the specific energy of someone who has been handed a situation they did not create and cannot fully comprehend the depth of yet. She looked at Colette. She looked at the zip tie on the table. She looked at Winston Delray's card, which someone had apparently already given her, because her face had the look of a person who has just been shown a document that rearranges everything they thought they knew about the last 20 minutes. "Ms. Warren," she said, "I am so. Don't apologize to me," Colette said. Her voice was the same volume it had been all night. "Apologize to your staff for whatever training led to this, and then figure out why 20 people in that lobby watched a man zip tie a woman in a chair and decided it wasn't their concern." She stood up. "I have a dinner reservation." Priya Anand opened her mouth. Colette walked past her. Marcus was in the lobby when she came out. Her son-in-law, younger than her by 25 years, still in his hospital scrubs under an open coat because he hadn't had time to change. He took one look at her face and one look at his father's face and understood the shape of the evening without anyone explaining it. "Mom," he said, because that is what he called her. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm hungry. We can go somewhere else." "We have a reservation," she said. "I'm not leaving because of him." She didn't look back at Fitch, who was still standing near the corridor entrance with Dennis Straw beside him, both of them with the stunned quality of men who have just watched a wall they thought was solid turn out to be paper. She didn't look back because she had decided, a long time ago, that people who behave the way Joel Fitch behaved do not deserve the performance of her looking at them. They are not the point. They never were. The restaurant was 6 blocks away. Italian place, white tablecloths, the kind of bread that comes with actual olive oil and not the butter packets. They got there 15 minutes late and the host seated them without comment because Winston Delray had called ahead. They ordered. The bread came. Marcus watched his mother-in-law in the way people watch someone they love when they are not sure how much of something she is carrying and whether she will let them help. "You okay?" he asked. She tore a piece of bread. "I've been better. Do you want to?" "No," she said. "I want to eat. And then I want to call Diane." Her daughter. "And then tomorrow I want to look at the legal options, because what happened tonight was not legal, and it will happen to someone else in that lobby next week unless someone makes it expensive to repeat." Winston nodded slowly. "I already have someone." "I know you do." She smiled, small and real. "That's why I waited." Marcus lived between them. "You waited? In there?" "I wasn't going to give him the reaction he wanted," Colette said simply. "He wanted me to be frightened or angry. Either one would have made his version of events more credible." She dipped the bread in the olive oil. "So I waited." Here is what Joel Fitch did not know about Colette Warren, and what the 20 people in the lobby did not know, and what the story is not really about, even though it is the thing that changes everything once it is known. Colette Warren had spent 34 years as a civil rights attorney. She had argued before federal courts in 11 states. She had worked on cases that redrew how certain protections were applied to exactly this kind of situation. A private security officer, a semi-public space, a detention without cause. She had, at one point in her career, literally written the legal brief that established the precedent under which Joel Fitch's employer could be held liable for what he did tonight. She knew this before she sat down in that chair. She knew it when he approached her. She knew it every second she was in that room. And she said nothing about it. Not because she was afraid. Not because she didn't have the words. But because, and this is the part she would explain later, in the quiet voice she always used, a person should not need to recite their credentials to be treated with basic dignity. The system should work for the woman in the chair who cannot name a federal precedent, just as surely as it works for the one who can. If the only way out is to prove you are important enough to deserve protection, then the protection isn't working. It's just working for the important. That was the sentence. That was the one that mattered. Marcus set down his fork. He'd heard her say versions of it before, in speeches, in interviews, in the way she talked about her cases over the years. But there was something different about hearing it at a restaurant table, 6 blocks from a hotel lobby where her wrists had been bound with a zip tie because a man with a radio and a uniform decided she looked like she didn't belong. "You should have said something," he said. Not accusatory, just the residual fear of what could have happened. "I did say something," she said. "I said exactly what anyone should have to say. I'm waiting for someone, and I have the right to sit here." She looked at him steadily. If that wasn't enough, nothing I added should have been required to make it enough. Winston was quiet for a moment. He was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, it was because he had something that needed saying. "The footage is already with legal," he said. "Both cameras, the timestamp on the zip tie application, the duration of the detention." He folded his hands. "He's done." "I know," she said. "And the hotel. The hotel will settle. They always do." She wasn't bitter when she said it. She was just accurate. The question is what the settlement requires them to change. That's the conversation I want to have. The breadbasket was empty. Marcus refilled their water glasses because the server was across the room. The restaurant was full and warm and smelled like garlic and something that had been braising for a long time. Outside, the night was cold and clear. Colette Warren sat at a restaurant table with the 2 men who were her family and looked at the menu and decided on the pasta with the lemon butter sauce and thought about the 20 people in the lobby who had turned away and what it would take, not just tonight, not just this case, but over time, slowly, with patience and documentation and the occasional expensive lesson, to make turning away harder than speaking up. She didn't think she'd live to see it finished. She had never expected to. But she had spent 34 years adding to the foundation, one case at a time, one cosint at a time, one room at a time, and she was not done yet. And the man with the zip ties and the absolute certainty that she didn't belong would find that out in the weeks ahead in a way that was quiet and thorough, and would cost considerably more than he had bargained for when he decided that a woman sitting still in a chair was something that needed to be corrected. The waiter came. She ordered the pasta. She asked if they could bring more bread. I keep coming back to the zip tie on the table. Not the confrontation. Not the moment Winston walked in. Not even the part where Fitch stood there trying to find the sentence that would make what he did sound reasonable. I keep coming back to the zip tie sitting on that folding table in a room that smelled like burnt coffee, and the fact that Colette Warren looked at it and didn't say a single word about who she was. She could have. That's what gets me. She had every credential, every legal precedent, every professional title that would have made Joel Fitch take 3 steps back. And she chose not to use any of it, not because she forgot, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something that most people spend their whole lives not understanding. Your dignity isn't a credential. It doesn't require proof of employment. It doesn't need a business card. That's character. That's what I think about when I think about who Colette Warren actually is. Not the attorney, not the precedent setter, not the woman with 34 years of federal case history. The person who sat in that chair and held her wrists out and said you're making a mistake with the same voice she used to order pasta. That's not performance. That's who you are when everything around you is trying to make you smaller. And then there's what she did with her mind in that room. She didn't panic. She didn't escalate. She cataloged. She noted the cameras. She stayed quiet in a way that preserved every option she had and closed off none of them. I think about that a lot. The difference between reacting and thinking. Reacting feels powerful in the moment and costs you everything afterward. Thinking feels like restraint and turns out to be the most powerful thing in the room. Joel Fitch reacted. He saw something that made him uncomfortable and he moved on impulse, and every impulse after the first one was just him defending the first one. That's how these things go. One bad decision becomes a structure you have to live inside. Colette thought. Every second she sat in that chair, she was thinking. And then there's the third thing, the part I find hardest to talk about but can't leave out. She had been through rooms like that before. Not that specific room, not that specific man, but that specific experience of being looked at and found wanting by someone with a uniform and a set of assumptions. She knew what it cost. She paid it anyway. She sat down in that chair and she stayed. Not because it was easy, but because walking away would have meant agreeing that she didn't belong there. And she was done agreeing to things that weren't true. That's the kind of endurance that doesn't make the news. It's quiet. It looks from the outside like stillness, but it is the hardest thing, to keep showing up with your whole self to rooms that have already decided what you are, and to do it not with rage and not with performance, but with the same low, steady voice you've been using your whole life. Colette Warren ordered more bread. That's where I land every time. She ordered more bread. After everything, the zip tie, the folding table, the 20 people who turned away, the whole exhausting weight of it, she sat at a table with her family and she ordered more bread because she was hungry, because she had earned the meal, because she was not going to let a man with a radio and a set of wrong assumptions take up any more of her evening than he already had. That, to me, is what it looks like to live with integrity, not the big moments. The bread.